Welcome, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. This is Tea Time. I'm Teresa Torreseva. I'm excited this week to be joined by Chris Dickerson from the West Virginia Record. Chris is a reporter who regularly breaks some of the biggest stories in the state, both political and legal, and covers all things legal in terms of the West Virginia court system and what's happening with the West Virginia citizens with regard to their rights in the court system. Chris, thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you for having me, Trace. It's a pleasure.
Well, I really appreciate it. This is sort of our inaugural show. I think I have to tell you, though, that people really want to know what's going on in the court system. And I guess that's my first question for you. Am I biased? I'm a lawyer, so I admit that bias. Or are you finding that these stories are really something like people are eager to sort of digest and learn about, stories about what's going on in lawsuits and in the court system?
Right, absolutely. And, the way mainstream media has changed over the last 20 years especially, but even the last 30 years, newspapers, they don't have as many people in the newsroom covering beats. And one of the ones that has just kind of fallen to the wayside is courts reporter. 30 years ago, every newspaper had a courts reporter, and then they had a police reporter. And then eventually it became that a lot of newspapers, they had a cops/courts reporter. And now, they're not covering anything except really big murder trials or something like that. They just don't have the manpower to devote someone to go down to the courthouse every day. And that's kind of where we came in. Actually 14 years ago, just a few weeks ago, we started this paper, and we cover the court system in West Virginia. And we just cover the civil court system.
So you've been doing that for 14 years because you've been with the Record, right, that entire time?
Yes. Yeah.
So do you find that you're almost like a specialized journalism because you're like a sports reporter knows how to report on sports and what people want to hear. You're a court reporter.
Right. Exactly.
But not the kind that takes down what the lawyers are saying, the kind that reports on the lawsuits.
Machine or anything.
Although I always thought those were so cool, the shorthand version of so much talking. So, and your paper seems to be very popular. You're based in Charleston, but statewide, you cover. I see coverage about articles from the Eastern Panhandle, the Southern Coalfields, and the Northern Panhandle up here in Wheeling, all over. It seems to be that you have information and reporting on what's happening in the court system statewide.
Yeah, we have access to most of the circuit courts in the state, and where we've been around for so long, and a lot of people in the legal community see what we're doing, and they know it's an important, a valuable commodity. That there's a lot of reporters who will send me story ideas. Say, here's a complaint that I filed this week in Grant County, or they have stuff that they think everyone in the state needs to know about. So that helps a lot. And then like I said, we have electronic access to most of the court systems in the state. So we're covering everything.
You really do, and I want to dig into the substance, sort of talk about some of the current stuff. But before I do that, I have to share with you, and you're going to love this. So oftentimes I have seen comments online on social media to the effect of, sometimes, and I really appreciate you putting in context, by the way, about how both television, newspapers, departments had, court reporters that would cover the court beat, police beat, that type of thing, and now they don't. A lot of times the local news will put out the story and it sort of just scratches the surface and it leaves you wanting for more as to what's really going on. And I often see the comments, just go read the story in the Record and you'll know what's happening.
Yeah, I've seen that too.
And so I want to pass that along. I think it's a great comment to the work you're doing and I've seen that even from other reporters, and I think they mean it as a real compliment, but it's the in-depth analysis that you're doing that serves as sort of the basis for everyone else is even to be able to report on what's happening in the court system. And so I think that's great.
What we try to do is we try to fill a niche that, like I said, that people just they don't have access to anymore. And, we've got our company, and we're owned by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So our editorial page does have a certain pro-business / slant.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is a pro-business slant, but that's their right to do that. And that's the opinion page. The rest of it's reporting, right?
Yes, and we don't hit the mark every time, but we certainly try to be fair and objective on those other every other story except the editorial. And we seek out to talk to both sides when we can. As you know, a lot of attorneys and clients don't want to talk about the cases, the defense or the plaintiff's side. So we understand that, but when there's something that needs to be talked about, we try to go and at least give someone the opportunity to talk. So.
That's right. Really, I mean, that's sort of the creed of journalism. I mean, that's what it's about, right? The platform to create the transparency to talk about what's happening in our society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really...
I mean, like you said, when there's a big case or a big story that we're following, we try to give it some perspective. So people who don't have a law degree, and I don't have a law degree, but, we try to get it to where they can understand what it means and why it's important.
I think that's right. And I have to tell you, too, I think the editorial page does a really nice job. Whether you agree or disagree isn't really the point. It always makes you think about whatever the issue is that has your editors upset and has them speaking out. And that's something I really have a lot of respect for.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
We work hard at what we do. So,
well, let's talk about some of the stories you've been reporting on lately. A big story that you broke, and it's really, really important to the citizens of West Virginia, no matter what county or town you're from, is this information about the opioid case. Tell folks what's the status of that as you understand it in terms of your reporting.
Okay. Well, I don't know how many listeners know because it's a very complicated matter.
It's a mess, right? It's a national nightmare in terms of the litigation itself, right? With cases from all over the country.
Yeah, these thousands of cases have been what they call consolidated in a multi-district litigation up in Cleveland in the Northern District of Ohio. Well, what the judge up there is doing now, they're kind of doing these bellwether cases where they're going to have a certain county or municipality sue just a few of the defendants instead of this list of hundreds of defendants, manufacturers and distributors and all that, pharmacies. And they're trying to just break it down, kind of like doing little trials in each little segment, I guess you could look at. And two of them that are really hot right now is Cabell County and Huntington. And they filed their separate cases, but they're very similar. Well, what this judge is now doing, they're in the process, and on Monday, he granted a motion by Cabell County and the city of Huntington to split their claims against just what they call the big three, which is AmerisourceBergen, Cardinal Health, and McKesson, these opioid distributors. So what happens next is these, after he granted the motion, like I said, he granted that motion to split them up Monday. The next step is those plaintiffs will again file another motion to dismiss all the other claims against these three companies except for common law public nuisance, civil conspiracy, and punitive damages. And that's all their two trials are going to focus on, 3 defendants and 3 claims. So, and after that is when, this is where it really gets different, those cases are going to be sent back to West Virginia federal court to be heard here. And that might mean that what they want to do is instead of having hundreds or thousands of trials, they're going to have these bellwether trials, and it'll basically say whichever way it goes, the cities and the counties or the defendants will say, well, let's just settle these other ones that are similar for a similar percentage or something like that. So, it doesn't clog up the court system.
Right,
up
which
in
it
Cleveland
would.
Yeah.
In fact, the court system may very well be unable to try all of those cases. Right. There's so many, and that's part of the sadness and the tragedy of it all. And it's interesting, Chris, because Cabell and both Cabell County and the city of Huntington separately have their own claims for financial losses related to essentially treating and managing and dealing with the fallout of the opioid addiction, right? The addicts, the medical care, the ambulance run, the fire runs. And they are really, it seems like I mean, I've been following your reporting on this, which has been very good, by the way. But it seems like they're really kind of having a seat at a national table in a big way, as it ought to be, because we've learned that that's been sort of the epicenter of the opioid crisis, right?
Exactly.
And especially in Cabell and Wayne and Huntington and some other areas. So it's kind of reassuring. I read about that and I feel good as a citizen of West Virginia that we're being well represented. And if we're entitled to money back, then that's the process where it's going to happen.
Yeah, and of all these, like I said, thousands of national cases, it's San Francisco, Chicago, the Cherokee Nation, and then right now Cabell and Huntington. That's like the 5 big cases nationally right now. And
I love it.
What people also don't understand is, besides all these ones that went up to Ohio, there's a lot of cities and counties and towns that have not done that. And here in West Virginia, they're filing claims in state court. And there's a mass litigation panel that's similar to this federal one up in Cleveland, that they're working on the same kind of stuff for these other cases.
That's happening in West Virginia, you mean? So the mass litigation panel in West Virginia is currently handling litigation for all of the counties that aren't in the Cleveland federal litigation.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's such a big case that people just don't. I think a lot of the attorneys involved don't even understand just how big this is. I think it could end up being bigger than the tobacco litigation from 20, 25 years ago.
I was just going to ask you that if you could think of one that was bigger. Breast implant litigation bankrupted Dow Corning, as I recall. And that was a long time ago. Asbestos litigation was huge, right?
Yeah.
So many American workers harmed. And after all that time, it was proven that the corporate powers that be knew all along about the dangers. And so there were lawsuits, and lawsuits still continue with asbestos litigation. But I have to tell you, Chris, I think the opioid litigation will be the largest litigation in American history by a lot of measures when it's all said and done.
I think it will, and I think it's this idea that they're doing with the public nuisance is really what's different about it, because you didn't have people shooting up in the alleys and needing ambulances and EMTs with cigarettes. I mean, it was obviously dangerous, bad for the health, but they can point and say, I heard stories in Huntington, for example, where people would call and need an ambulance, and there were no ambulances available because they were all out giving Narcan to people in the streets.
It's true, Chris. Some of my favorite work that I do at my law firm is representing firefighters all over the state of West Virginia. And when I'm talking with them, sometimes just talking about other things or their work, I always am real intrigued about the opioid crisis and how badly it's affecting our community and what we can all do to help. And it's amazing to me how many times there are repeat, someone can be administered Narcan multiple times in the same day, can be released from a medical facility and be right back out on the street and need it the second time. So it really speaks to the power, I think, of the addiction, and how when someone's in that state, they've completely succumbed really to the addiction. And but it clearly, though, and it plays along exactly what you're saying, had a dramatic impact, because the resources to send the first responders, to administer the Narcan, to offer the medical care, which is life-saving, but it costs money. And
the Narcan costs money to the cities and counties.
A lot of money, right? And isn't Narcan relatively new because it's an antidote, right? It's interesting. So I'm sure it's very expensive. Of course, I'm no expert in how expensive, but I do know they are bleeding cash. And I think it certainly seems that the strength of the case is there for the cities, counties, towns all over America. But the court hasn't spoken yet. It's pending litigation. And so far, Chris, it's getting bigger, isn't it? I mean, every time I read a story, it's like, it's being managed well, but it's also continuing to explode, because really every city, town, county, state in America has a claim.
Yeah, or they could have a claim if they choose to do so. Yeah.
Of course, we've learned, right, that the opioid crisis has hit some areas much harder than others. So, and West Virginia is one of those areas. So the claims are going to be bigger where they've been hit harder, it seems.
Right. So. Yeah. You would think so. If the attorneys get what they want, they'll obviously, for example, Cabell County might not get as much as Chicago, but per capita, you would hope they do.
That's right. That's exactly right. And maybe even a little enhancement considering the level with which, West Virginia became a pill dumping ground is established very well by the records that show the numbers of pills that came here. And, we're a small state with 1.8 million people. We could all do that math in terms of how many pills there were and, what must have been happening and not happening. So let's switch gears and let's talk about another story I'm watching that's very fun and interesting for me as a political junkie. 2020 is heating up. I noticed and have noticed, Chris, that the Record does some really good political coverage if someone's filing for office. I appreciate that you all don't take sides or jump in the middle of it, but the reporting is quite good in keeping us up to speed on who's doing what, especially when it comes to the judges, justices, and attorney generals, right? The court system. And I hear
you focus on primarily. Yeah.
Exactly right. You focus on, and of course, as a lawyer, these are the ones I want to know about the most. And so the attorney general race is heating up, huh?
Right. Yeah. Just this week. Actually, Isaac Spinagle, who's a delegate from over in Pendleton County, he filed to run as a Democrat for Attorney General. And that puts two people so far who have said that they're going to run the Democratic primary. It's him and Sam Petronk, who's an attorney down in Beckley.
Yes.
A lot of people, you've probably heard the name Isaac Spinagle, because not just because he's a delegate, but he's been the one who has filed this lawsuit regarding Governor Justice and his residency and whether he is spending enough time at the Capitol and the governor's mansion and all that. He's the one who has been fighting that lawsuit. He filed it on behalf of himself as a resident of the state, not as a delegate, not as an attorney general candidate, but just as a resident of the state. And it's before the state Supreme Court right now, so who knows where that'll go. But on Monday he files and says that he had some very harsh words for Patrick Morrisey, the current Republican Attorney General. So I think it's going to be an interesting race. In 2016, Morrisey ran against Doug Reynolds, and it was a very contentious and tight battle. And of course, Morrisey won the second term. But this one, I think it'll be interesting. It seems like Spinagle came out swinging, and I think it will be very interesting in the next few months, especially.
I agree. And just a quote from your article, Delegate Spinagle, who is now a candidate for Attorney General, said, and I quote, "I'm disgusted with Attorney General Patrick Morrisey worshiping out-of-state special interests," unquote. So he definitely came out swinging. And it was interesting, too, his lawsuit, which you also reported on and covered, I followed in the West Virginia Record, about the residency requirement with the governor. It's interesting how political that is. As a lawyer, I look at that and I think it's very, very clear that he's not meeting the requirement. That's Teresa Torseva's opinion. That's my legal opinion, though, Chris. I have to tell you, if you read the Constitution, the law. Now, I get all the arguments about why it should be different or why it might not matter, and I understand the arguments that would be made by the governor. My point, though, in saying this is, could a governor live in Wheeling? I think so. Yeah. Chris. So I'm going to shut up about it, right? Because when we get a governor from Wheeling and the governor doesn't want to live in Charleston and is living up here in Wheeling, we're just going to point to the Jim Justice administration as proof that you don't have to live at the Capitol. And I guess that's really, I'm a little bit joking and a little bit serious. I guess that's really the question about that lawsuit. Do we have to honor the Constitution or change it, or does it mean what it says it means? And, do they have to live at the Capitol? And then, and it's also part of in fairness to Governor Justice, it's part of a political attack, which, may be justified, but that he isn't showing up at the Capitol to work, right? So it's really about, you're not at the governor's mansion, which is you could then walk across the street to the Capitol where you're also not showing up. So a lot of it, of course, is politics. And that's the fun of it, right? And, but what's interesting is, here's the question, and maybe I missed this, but you tell me, has Attorney General Morrissey declared that he will run for Attorney General?
I don't think there's been any official announcement, but when Isaac Spinagle, announced Monday that he was running, Morrissey's campaign put out something basically saying, you need to look at our record, and we've done a good job, and we fought what we fought in the last few years, the opioid epidemic and all that. So, there's never been an official announcement, but all indications are that Morrissey is going to run for Attorney General again.
Yeah, very good. And that's what I wondered too. I've been watching that and I have not seen that official announcement. And you hear the rumors about other seats, of course, about possibly running for other seats. Of course, politicians are always, I think, evaluating their options, public officials, to run for possibly different seats. And so you see that commonly. And I was just wondering, I think there's at least been some consideration perhaps by Attorney General Morrissey about other seats. And maybe they all had that.
Right, but I don't think there's going to be any difference this year. I mean, I've not talked to him about it, but I would be surprised if he does run for Attorney General again. One other thing about that, the case against Justice that Spinagle filed, and you were talking about why you think that he does not meet the qualifications. Someone I was talking to the other day when I was writing this story, they basically were saying, well, the thing is, this Constitution was written in 1872, and a whole lot has changed in almost 150 years. And will the court, whichever court ends up finally deciding on it, look and say, we need to really look at this residency stuff again, because the world is a lot different than it was in 1872.
Yeah, the internet and stuff, cars.
yeah, cars, airplanes.
We're beyond airplanes. I mean, we're just beyond it all. And listen, and I was kidding a little earlier, but not really. It is an important question. We're a small state with panhandles. Martinsburg is a long way from Charleston. Wheeling is a long way from Charleston. Sometimes I think the panhandles and the folks who live in the panhandles have a feeling of being cut off from the government, from the activities of the state. And a lot of times folks don't want to run from the panhandles because they don't want to have the travel. So you don't want to be, literally that's it's hard on their family, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. If anyone can run for governor and then be governor from their home county, then that's okay with me. In other words, I just think it needs to be fair. So if it's a requirement, then it's good. It's good for, regular folks and billionaires and, whoever becomes governor. But if it's not, that's okay too. But it can't be a pick and choose. And it seems that the Constitution requires it. So the other thing is, if it requires it and we don't want it, then we have to change the law, right?
Exactly.
And so I'm a law and order kind of person, because otherwise, how do you know that it's not just favoritism because it's political? But if it's good for Republicans, it's good for Democrats, good for the goose, good for the gander, all good, or not. And I think that's what this issue comes down to. So I think the court ultimately has to either decide that he's violating it and therefore there has to be some consequence, or, which I think is more likely, he's violating it, but this can't apply this way because it doesn't make any sense anymore. And by the way, future governors don't have to live at the Capitol. But that's a big, think about that, Chris. Future governors do not have to live in Charleston at the Capitol. So what is the Capitol then if the governor doesn't live there? I don't know.
Well,
it's an interesting question, isn't it?
Another question that no one's really talked about much is the state Supreme Court hears this. Governor Justice appointed 3 of the 5 current justices. They all might have been elected since then, but he appointed Evan Jenkins, and he appointed Tim Armstead, and he appointed John Hutchison to the bench. So are they going to recuse themselves? It's a very interesting case.
It's interesting too because their recusal could be politically charged individually, and I'm certain they'll evaluate it that way. And two of the three that you mentioned are up for re-election in 2020.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, which is really interesting.
And justice will be at the top of the ballot because the justices don't have party affiliation anymore, but they'll be on the Republican ballot.
Is the lawsuit still pending against Governor Justice? Is it? I know it's still pending. Is it in the circuit court or the appellate court?
Yeah, it's appellate, I think.
Oh, it's at the Supreme Court. So they did. Yeah. That's right. Your reporting was that Governor Justice filed a writ of prohibition to the Supreme Court to stop to stop the questions, saying basically no one has authority to proceed against me on this issue.
And he has a former U.S. attorney, a former acting U.S. Attorney General representing him. So, it's a very interesting case to watch.
Former acting U.S. Attorney General representing him. Fascinating.
George I can't pronounce the last name. Terwilliger or something like that.
Suffice it to say, he's very, very important. Is he from West Virginia? I assume no, right?
No, he is not. He works out of D.C.
So that may not be the best call. Interesting. As a lawyer, I always wonder about who is better suited, someone within or someone, from the outside that kind of comes in and sees things differently. One thing's for sure, this is a case to watch. One thing's for sure, it is absolutely, I think, a platform that will serve Delegate Spinagle, now candidate for Attorney General, well. These issues, it's a constitutional issue. It's an important issue. And I think really the court is going to have to decide, and if they don't decide at all, if for some reason they don't let the case in, or they don't decide to hear it, or they simply dismiss the writ, that is deciding. It's because it's letting it occur then also for future governors.
Right.
But it's very, very interesting. And, this idea of, Governor Justice says, well, I'm saving the taxpayers' money. And that may very well be true, but I don't think that's the point. It's the Constitution requires it. And more importantly, what is the state capital if the governor doesn't live there?
That's an excellent question.
Is there a state capital anywhere in the United States where the governor doesn't live? I mean, how about any other state, and I'm sure these are all questions that we're going to be looking at in the future, because this case is going to be hot through 2020, I think. Don't you?
I absolutely do. Yeah, I think it will have a huge impact on it could impact the governor's race, the attorney general's race, and the Supreme Court race.
The Supreme Court race. Will you also be reporting on the Supreme Court race as it develops or as issues? Although there really aren't any issues there anymore. It's kind of nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just politics, but that's okay. They've got to run for office, right?
Right. Yeah, after that, just a very, very long 17 and 18, but especially 2018, they've kind of been just doing their job and keeping quiet and nose to the grindstone, however you want to put it. And you might not agree with their opinions, but you're not dealing with couches and rugs, things like that.
You're not dealing with outrage and allegations of corruption, and that's exactly right. You're just talking about policy, and we're arguing about what should be and what's right and wrong, and that's what the system is supposed to do. And like you said, we might not agree with their opinions, or you might agree, but it's based on how it should work. I do think there's a sense in the legal community that things are improving, and that the race, well, interesting, the upcoming race, because we have 3 justices' seats up for election, or up for renewal. Three are up, so possibly 3 changes, or 3 staying the same, or so there could be big changes in the court or not. But that makes the race interesting. But there's no longer a lot of controversy surrounding the court or the races. In fact, that'll be an issue with voter turnout in May, right? Because it's a one and done for all judicial races in West Virginia now.
Yeah. Because all judges on the ballot, they'll be decided in May.
Yes.
They don't go till November like governor the House and AG and all that.
And they're not Democrats or Republicans, even though they may be privately, but publicly it's nonpartisan, which is a relatively new thing for West Virginia, but is something I think that seems to go well for judicial elections. It keeps
I think so too.
judges from being these, from that divisive political rancor that really is unbecoming of a jurist who's supposed to be a neutral referee, right?
Yeah.
So
noticed,
it's okay if it's politics, but they're supposed to be neutral.
Yeah, in 2018, I heard a lot of people talking about whether a judge or a justice candidate was conservative or liberal, and I think that will still be the case, and it could be very, very much a part of the whole campaign. Even though they won't say Republican or Democrat, there'll be a lot of talk about conservative values and liberal values and things like that.
Trying to get those messages across. And then, of course, the outside groups that can support the candidates, right, and say what they want to say. And boy, you're right. So we look for those buzzwords, and we know it's because the race is nonpartisan. But some of the partisanship still screams through from both sides. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and that's an important point, too, for folks. I mean, May of 2020 is it. That's your chance to vote. And a lot of people think that the most important thing about voting for president is the power of the presidency to appoint judges and justices. And I think there's some truth to that. So it's really important when you get a direct vote for, you get to, it's like being the president. You get to elect or nominate the highest judges and justices in your state, right? May of 2020 is when we vote for that.
Right.
They're probably likely glad that they only have to do one race, not a primary and a general.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, because right now, as we're talking, I think there are 7 people who have declared that they're running for the Supreme Court, and there's only 3 seats, like you said, and some names besides the 3 who are sitting there: Tim Armstead and John Hutchison, of course. Margaret Workman, who's one of the people whose seat is up. She hasn't declared if she's running or not. She's not on the list even.
So I have to say, she would be incredibly hard to beat if she decided to run.
You think so?
I think so, but my guess is that she would not decide to run, just based on. But that's a pure guess. If you hear so much speculation, it's an interesting point you made. She hasn't made that public declaration yet, and that's a game changer for sure. Whatever you think about the race, it's a game changer if she were to stay in. I think the wisdom is that she will likely bow out. But you have to wonder if someone hasn't announced yet if they're maybe still deciding.
Yeah, and besides Hutchison and Armstead, who are already, they're incumbents, you've got Joanna Tabbitt, a circuit judge in Kanawha County, and
she's very popular.
Richard Neal. Yeah, very popular.
She's well known up here as well, in Wheeling.
She's been campaigning all over the state.
Yes,
for several months now. Again, and plus she has her name recognition from the 2018 race where she almost got a seat anyway.
And Chris, she's got that likability factor. She just sort of exudes credibility and likability. People feel like so, and that's important because judges have to rule against people, not just for them. And if someone is likable and credible, you might be mad about their ruling against you, but you kind of can accept it, right? And we need judges who have the authority that they can issue rulings people don't like and they get accepted.
Yeah,
she's like that.
Right.
She's got that kind of authority.
And you got Richard Neely, who was a former state Supreme Court justice.
An interesting character who will no doubt bring a lot of color to the race in terms of the discussion. Very, very bright. He's very experienced, and he doesn't really hold back, does he? I mean, if he's got something to say, he's going to say it, and what's on his mind. And there's a certain element I think people respect that.
Yeah, I think it rubs some people the wrong way, but some people really love his candor.
That's right. It's a love or hate. But listen, public officials that are either love or hate are usually the ones getting attention, and that helps you gain voters. It's a good thing.
And in the 14 years that I've been doing this job, and I've talked to him several times, and it's always an interesting interview, even well before he was even thinking about running for Supreme Court again. It's you've got to set aside an hour to talk to him, and it's going to be interesting the whole hour.
It is going to be interesting, and really and truly, he has some of the greatest legal opinions, really. You could say that have ever come from the court. I mean, some of his, and always with colorful language, the really stupid and really mean standard for determining punitive damages. But the funny thing is if you explain it, you go, well, that's about right. That standard.
Yeah.
That fits. And so, but he has a unique way of explaining it, and he's running against sitting Justice Armstead, and they really are two very different characters. So there'll be a contrast for the voters.
Very much so.
So,
and you got the three other candidates real quick are William Schwartz, who's a Charleston attorney, and Jim Douglas, who is a Kanawha County family court judge.
Both of whom ran in 2018, if I recall.
Yes. Right, they did. And Laura Dyer, who is a circuit judge in Mason County, I think. Yeah.
I think that's right. I read about her throwing her hat in the ring, too, and she's a sitting circuit court judge. And, Chris, do you think that those who are going to run do you think there are going to be more?
I think there might be a few more. I don't really know who they are, but I just think that there'll be, I think the filing deadline is December 31st, or maybe it's January 31st. I can't remember off the top of my head, but there'll be some people who file at the last minute, and there always are.
Yeah, there will be.
And it could be a big name, or it could be someone that, no one outside of their little town knows of. Who knows?
Well, one of the things, I'm glad you're following, because the judges, justices, and attorney general races are some of the most important. And, sometimes they don't get as much attention because of the other races, which are more divisive and controversial, and sometimes more biting or more divisive, I guess. And so we appreciate the coverage on that, and we will continue. I think we should do this again, Chris. We should, continue to update folks. Let's have a conversation after the holidays and see where things are shaking out politically. January is going to be a big month because we're going to know exactly who's on what ticket, who's running for what. We won't have to speculate about whether someone's running again or not, or what their intentions are, because the filing deadline will come and go. So let's continue that conversation and keep up the great reporting. Lawyers do appreciate in-depth analysis and accurate reporting on the court system, and not a lot of folks out there doing it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's always good to hear. So
keep up the good work. Chris, we'll talk again soon. I really appreciate it. Chris Dickerson from the West Virginia Record, the editor of the West Virginia Record, reporting on the court system and political races for those who run the court system, our judges and justices here in West Virginia. Chris, thank you. Have a great evening.
All right, thanks.
This has been Tea Time. I'm Teresa Torreseva. Thanks for listening.